much bigger ask, I think.
Baby steps.
Doesn't do scary movies, so.
All right, 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome to episode 56 of Some Like It, Scott. I'm Scott Harvey, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Scott Shelton. Scott, today we'll be donning the title of losers as we descend into the sewers for our second Stephen King adaptation of the year, It, Chapter 2. But first, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Scott. This morning we were texting back and forth. You saw It Chapter 2 last night. I saw it this morning at 11 a.m. And really all I was feeling was that 2 hours and 50 minutes of a clown horror movie was just really not what I was in the mood for. But I will say, I think I came out more positive than I went going in. So that's
no spoilers.
A good thing.
No spoilers.
Hey, I'm not spoiling anything.
Yeah, fair. I mean, 2 hours and 50 minutes is a big ask for any movie. Yep. We'll talk about why I think it's especially a big ask for a horror movie. But it just seems like this is the trend nowadays. Movies are just so much longer. Like
it's the year of the long movie.
It really is. Like next week we got The Goldfinch, which is 2.5 hours. Ford versus Ferrari is 2.5 hours. Irishman is 3.5 hours. I mean, we got some long boys coming. So
yeah, we don't even know how long Rise of Skywalker is yet. That could be really long.
Well, yeah. So on the Rise of Skywalker thing, there is something about how John Williams made 2 hours and 20 minutes worth of music. Yeah. And he says that there's music all the way through. So it's going to be at least 2 hours and 20 minutes long, which is not surprising.
Yeah. I mean, even that is a minimum. That's probably the longest one since like probably episode 3, right? Episode 3 was pretty long, wasn't it?
Yeah, that would be consistent with like Last Jedi and Force Awakens, I think. But
okay, I thought it would be a little longer.
Anyway, as thrilling as this is, we're not going to leave our surprise guest, not really a surprise, but our guest waiting in the rafters for much longer. Because Scott, we are very pleased today to have our favorite recurring guest back on the pod to discuss It Chapter 2. You may remember her from our last Stephen King episode on which we reviewed Pet Sematary. Now she's back for another Fright Fest. We've already talked about her coming on for Dr. Sleep to make it, the holy trinity this year of Stephen King adaptations. But until then, it's our pleasure to welcome back Dani Kunkel. And there she is. What's up, Dani? How's it going?
Hi, guys. Very excited to be back. Thank you for not banning me after my first go around. Really appreciate it.
Not at all.
Although I have to say, you called me your favorite guest, but I know you guys have had, is his name Jay on a couple of times. So I
look at that.
Being
regular listener right there.
But if you mean it, I'll take it.
No,
you are our favorite.
Scott Harvey's favorite guest. I don't know you that well.
We've talked about having like genre specialists on, like, when we do horror, when we do whatever. So like, you're our horror, but also our Stephen King apparently expert right now. Although I'm not sure. Have you read a Stephen King book before? Not to dox you or anything. But
okay, I haven't read the books, but I've seen many Stephen King movies. And for right now, I'm fine with being at least somewhat of an expert. I'll take that title happily.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, without further ado, why don't we get into the movie?
Let's do it.
All right.
It Chapter 2 picks up a mere 27 years after the events of the first film, in which the ragtag Adolescent Losers Club defeated, for the time being, the shape-shifting demon Pennywise, played by Bill Skarsgård. The losers are now older, wiser, and enjoying their own lives until they get a call from Isaiah Mustafa's Mike Hanlon, the only member of the club to remain behind in their hometown of Derry, Maine. Mike greets them with distressing news. It has come back. Meanwhile, however, Bill, played by James McAvoy, is a successful writer in an unhappy marriage. Ben, played by Jay Ryan, has dropped his chubby figure and is running a lucrative company. Richie, played by Bill Hader, is a famous stand-up comedian. Eddie, played by James Ransom, is a businessman married to the second incarnation of his mother. And Bev, played by Jessica Chastain, is trapped in an abusive relationship. All of the losers return to Derry, however, still haunted by the ghosts of their childhood, and once again have to face their fears if they're to defeat Pennywise and save not only future generations, but also themselves. Dani, we'll start with you. The first It was a huge blockbuster success, and the splashy cast only adds to the hype for this sequel. So my first simple question is, does It Chapter 2 float like the first, or does it sink?
I think that I did like the sequel, but I still liked the first one better. The first one was just so good that I think that the bar was set so high. And while the second one was good, and I did like, the kind of star-studded cast and everything like that, I just think it didn't quite live up to the hype. But if I had to pick between Float and Sink, I think that my ultimate vote would be Float.
It's treading water, I think, maybe is the most appropriate phrase to use.
Probably.
All right, Scott, over to you. General impressions on this movie.
Scott, I think my overarching feeling about this movie, I already alluded to it in, when we were just warming up before we actually got into the movie here. And that's this movie is just long. It is really, really long. And I'm not saying that it doesn't necessarily earn some of its length. I think it does. I actually like this movie. The further I've gotten away from it, I think usually I come down off a high from seeing a movie. I'll be the first to admit that. But with this one, I walked out of the theater a little bit unsatisfied with certain aspects of the character development, both from, I think there's problems at the beginning. There's some, but fewer problems in the middle. And then I have a couple qualms with the ending notes that these characters get to leave on. But overall, I think I really enjoy this. The cast is fantastic. I will say, just to go ahead and bring up one of the points about character development in this movie that I questioned, and it comes from your intro about these characters being older and more wise. I'm not sure any of these characters are more wise. I mean, they're all definitely older, but they all seem to be, well, I shouldn't say all. At least half of them seem to be stuck in the same place that they were in Derry, Maine 27 years ago, which is a little bit befuddling, but maybe that's partly explained by the fact that they've forgotten so much about their childhood after they've left Derry, which isn't a spoiler. That's something that comes out in the very first few minutes of the film. But yeah, I think there's a few of them. You mentioned Bev. I think that is Eddie. They all seem like those two in particular seem like they're in the same place. I mean, Mike physically is in the same place. I think that's I have less of a problem with his character development, but I think that there's quite a few of them who don't feel like they've moved on, not physically, I guess, spiritually, emotionally, mentally past that time, even though they can't remember it. And I thought that was an interesting way to start. I don't have the reference point of having read the novel, of course, one of the all-time greats from Stephen King, but and I know being limited by the source material, there still felt like there were problems with that. And I don't know if that was part of trying to adapt this to screen, what was like an 800 or 900 page book, even in 2 parts, or if that was just a function of the source material, what that was. But that was one of the things that I struggled with starting out. And we can get into some of the problems that I have at the end, because those are a little bit more spoilery. But overall, I think the performances are really strong. Scott, I know, just to go ahead and out you on one of your opinions, you didn't like Bill Hader's performance that much in this movie. Yeah, okay, maybe you've softened on that take from when you posted a review on Letterboxd. But I really like this cast from top to bottom. I at first wasn't sure about Bill Hader, I'll be honest. I think that his character is one of those who is set up in a way that, honestly, I really was concerned that I was going to be with this character for 2 hours and 50 minutes because he's really off-putting at the beginning. But he really grows on me, even in spite of the awkward decisions I think maybe they made with his character. Again, not sure if that's coming from the source material or if it's coming from the adaptation. But Bill Hader really made the best of it. I think Jessica Chastain, as always, is really, really strong in her role. Always a good time to see. Was like, they reported 200 gallons of blood were used in the making of this film, and almost all of them went on to Jessica Chastain, which is pretty crazy and a little bit disturbing, to say the least. I think it was pig's blood. I can't remember what it was, but I was reading about it before.
Some Carrie flashbacks there.
So yeah, I think those 2 performances kind of lead the cast, but I think that is also true of the other specific members, including the kids who come back, and we get a little bit of them de-aged to make them look like this was shot concurrently with the original film, even though it wasn't. And it was noticeable because I went and looked at some of the red carpet stuff, or I guess it's not really red carpet, but the premiere stuff afterwards to see all them photographed together. And they look considerably younger in this movie than they do now, which I always think it's really funny to see, because I don't know if we've seen that in movies with kids, even though it's only been 1 or 2 years, being de-aged to look more like they were in a movie that was only shot a couple years ago. So overall, I'm coming out net positive, but some of that middle part, I've talked a lot about the positive here, but some of that middle part drags on. There's so many scenes that, if they aren't considered repetitive, are adjacent to repetitive, to the point where it seemed like everyone was doing the same thing, of course, dealing with their own demons and coming to terms with their own history and present, but still, it really drew things out. Even the ending too, I thought a couple times the movie was about to end, but somehow, I don't know. I don't want to get into too spoiler here, but it just keeps dragging on for a little bit.
Yeah. I definitely have a lot of problems with this movie. I think to piggyback on something that you said about people being stagnant and maybe not having changed that much from the first movie, that's actually not something that bothered me, because I do think that one of the themes of the movie is examining small town America and specifically like the cycles of violence and the cycles of abuse and everything that come and go. And I think it's necessary to have them in the same place, right? Like I said, Eddie's married to his mother. Bev is once again in an abusive relationship.
But that's not explored very much. But like those like
no,
minor plot
it's
details are not explored. Okay, yeah.
And I agree with that. I just think the idea on paper makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
Of them being in the same place, because part of what they're doing in trying to defeat Pennywise is break the cycle. And so I think that that part worked for me. I definitely empathize with some of your other comments, though. I think that the middle section in particular is very repetitive. I don't think that like any of the sequences are like bad. It's just like
no, they're not.
All of the parts on their own are individually good, but they don't add up to a good whole. It is repetitive. It is tiresome. Like if you take one of the scenes out, if you take the fifth one that we see out, then it's probably really good. But in the context of the movie, when you've just seen 4 scenes exactly like it beforehand, it's like it loses its scary effect because you know what's going to happen. And yes, okay, they're important for each character's development. I understand that, but like I just feel like they could have expedited it. Maybe been a little bit more.
There are too many characters also for them to deal with.
Been more efficient in how they told the story. And I think that the strongest part of this franchise, or these 2 movies, and especially the first movie, which I agree with what Danny and Scott have both said, that it's definitely the better movie, is the interaction between the characters. The relationships between the characters were so good, and I think that what Chapter 1 did really well is build up those relationships. It took its time to get to the big scares. Honestly, I rewatched it recently, and I was surprised like how much story and build up we really get. I mean, obviously you have the first part with Georgie, but like before we get into the like really serious funhouse scares and everything, they spend some time building up these relationships and make you care about these characters. And I don't think that they did that in the second movie. And I think that they should have, because even though it's the same characters, they're in much different places than they were in the first movie to some extent. I mean, we talked about maybe how some of them are kind of in the same place, but 27 years have gone by.
Well, they don't know each other anymore. I mean, to your point, even if they haven't changed that much, they don't know each other anymore.
Right. And so I wanted more scenes of them together. And I think that's why for me, the first hour of the movie is pretty good. Like I enjoyed the first hour of the movie, seeing these characters come back to Derry, get acquainted with each other. But then, to our point, in the middle section, they separate all of the characters and have them go on their own adventures, which, I wanted more of the dynamic together. And I think they hammer that home nicely in the end to good effect. I think in the last 10 minutes or so, they leave you on a nice emotional, heartstring tugging moment with all the characters. But it's a long slog to get there. And, disappointing, because I think, again, there are a lot of really good parts to this movie, but they just didn't add up to a satisfying whole, and definitely some pacing problems. But not a complete loser, no pun intended. Like I said, I think it starts strong, it ends strong. It's that meat in the middle of the burger that is a little bit of a problem.
Yeah, and to the point about the scares, I think this movie is significantly less scary than the first one, and I think that's because, to your point about the buildup, that Definitely. It doesn't have that buildup. It's almost from the opening scene, because the opening scene in this movie is not unlike the first, Chapter 1 with someone being devoured by Pennywise. And one of the things that this movie does is, even after that first scene, it doesn't then go and then start building your characters up. Like the next scene or the scene after that immediately has another scare, and you just get them sprinkled throughout to the point where you're desensitized to them almost by the end. Maybe not everyone will be. The guy sitting next to me in the theater seemed to go through a cycle each time that
the people sitting next to us.
Yeah. But I think that one of the things that this thing suffered from is not only repetition within the format of the scenes that it was going through with each character, but even once you get to some of the more climactic moments, the scares that it was using were direct callbacks, if not the exact same scenes that you saw in the first film, which I understand there was a purpose. And again, it might be the source material. That's what they have to work with. But I think that those scenes in particular were the ones that I felt dragged on the longest, because I'm like, we've seen this before. These scenes don't need to be that long. Maybe I would have appreciated them more if I'd rewatched the movie like you did, or the first movie like you did right before this, because I know some of them were direct callbacks to that. And some of them I will admit that I'd forgotten, or at least had become a little bit fuzzy on to how exactly they were calling back. But I just thought that those were the moments that were really repetitive, and it made me really question, like, you really didn't need extra runtime. You didn't need to do this. It didn't add anything to it. I didn't learn more about the characters because of these scenes, with maybe one or two exceptions. I'm thinking particularly of the one with Bill Hader and is it Ransom? I think that particular scene with the doors repeating itself towards the end of the movie. I thought that was it was again maybe a character moment for something that comes right immediately after that, but I didn't really feel like it was needed. And there's a couple of scenes like that towards the end that I felt were unnecessary and really bloated the runtime.
Yeah, I think there are some tone issues that also affect the scares, but we'll talk about those a little bit more when we talk about some of the cast. Dani, do you have anything to add before we get into the performances some?
No, I mean, I agree with what you guys said. I actually had not seen the first It until this week. Scott Harvey was like, do you want to come see It Chapter 2? And I was like, I don't know what happened, but I just never got around to seeing the first one. So I watched it this week, and I actually must say, Scott Shelton, I disagree. I felt like Chapter 2 was scarier to me with how many jump scares there were, because those get me. Like, even when you know it's coming.
Yeah, there were so many jump scares.
Oh my God.
I find that exhausting more than scary.
Yeah, no.
So
I'm with Scott, but it definitely affects people differently.
Yeah. So I think that the themes were scarier in Chapter 1. Like, just in general, they built up Pennywise's character better, and he was scarier, or it was scarier. But in Chapter 2, I think I jumped more, which obviously was like a stylistic choice of, the director, the producers, and everything like that. But I don't know. I think that overall, like I said, I liked Chapter 1 better, but I was just more scared the whole time in Chapter 2 because I was so tense. I was like, oh, when are they going to have something else pop up at me?
Yeah.
It's like a sense of dread because you've sensed it from how they especially each time one of them happens. They're really leaning into jump scares in this one, and so they're that they're going to keep doing that because that's just the thing that they did. It's whether it's again the source material, whether it's Muschietti's choice there. To me, I don't think that jump scares make it good horror, and ultimately, I think good horror is what scares me. But to your point, it's incredibly tense. To the point, and I think that this goes back to the pacing issue that Scott was talking about, pacing and tone issues. Maybe, tone's a separate thing. But when you're just getting nonstop jump scares, you never have a chance to really relax. And it felt like the middle portion of this movie was so formulaic that you knew exactly when the jump scares were going to happen. And the difference is in the first one. Just again, talk about the first one. You knew that they were going to come. Like at some point, you were going to get those jump scares, but it's interspersed with so many different themes, particularly around bullying and the whole coming of age theme as well, that it allowed you better pacing with the horror elements of the movie intermixed with that coming of age portion of it. And that this movie just lacked that a little bit. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it made for a different experience.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. With that, why don't we jump into the performances? Obviously, this movie has a big cast at the time. We didn't really know many of the actors. Finn Wolfhard had been from Stranger Things, but they all killed it. But this time around, we don't have the problem of anonymity, at least with some of the big names at the top of the bill. James McAvoy, Jessica Chastain, Bill Hader being the biggest names here. Bill Skarsgård also returning as Pennywise, the one returning actor in this movie. Stephen King makes a nice cameo. But Dani, we'll go to you first. Who of this, splashy cast stood out to you? Maybe someone I haven't mentioned as well. Who are the standout performers to you?
Okay, so obviously Bill Hader was a standout. Scott Harvey and I talked about this after we saw the movie together. I don't know necessarily that I thought he was a standout in a good way. Like I loved a lot of aspects of his performance. However, having just watched the first one, I don't think I laughed a single time during the first movie. It was just a horror movie through and through. And while I did appreciate some aspects of the comedic relief that Bill Hader brought, especially in his interactions with James Ranson playing Eddie, I thought it was too much. I thought it was kind of like, I know that the film is dark and I guess they didn't want to make people too sad or scared the whole time, but it was just like a couple too many comedic moments for me. I really loved Jay Ryan's performance as Ben. I have seen him in another TV show. He's not a very well-known actor, but I liked him already going in. So I loved his interactions with Jessica Chastain. I thought that little romance was cute. Like for me, I'm the kind of person that's always rooting for the romance in the movie. And I was going to be so mad if she ended up with Bill, James McAvoy. I don't know how to say his name properly. But long story short, there was a lot of standout performances. And to me, I think that it's hard to pick just one standout because I think, like Scott Shelton mentioned earlier, because there are so many characters, it was tough to see any one of them particularly developed. And while I think they all played their role very, very well, there's no one that I thought, oh, like that was a bad performance. I can't think of a single one of them that to me I was like, oh, wow, that was the best performance. I know that a lot of people have talked about Bill Hader's being the best. And I think that if I was less put off by the amount of humor they were putting in, I probably would have said the same thing because he was probably the most memorable performance. But for me, it wasn't like the best one, if that makes sense. So, I mean, overall, though, great cast. I love their interactions. But I would say that those were probably my general opinions. Mike's character, Isaiah Mustafa, was probably my least favorite out of the Losers Club. Some of his stuff, and he was working with some tough material. He had a lot of the supernatural stuff, and trying to sell some of that must be difficult as an actor. His parts just didn't feel quite as genuine to me throughout the entire performance. So I would say that he was probably one of my least favorite as far as that group goes. But like I said, generally speaking, I thought the whole cast was phenomenal. And like Scott Harvey and I talked about, the one person I actually wanted to see more of was Bill Skarsgård. I thought that we saw many variations of Pennywise's character without giving away spoilers, but we didn't actually see the clown Pennywise as much as I would have liked, because I think he's so scary just in and of himself. And by not seeing that as much, I think we lost some of that theme of horror to be replaced with the jump scares like we talked about.
Yeah. So I want to jump in to go off of a couple of things Danny said there. First of all, Bill Hader's performance. I agree with what Danny says. I think that the reason, and I think part of it is definitely the script, but it's just nonstop quips the entire time. Nonstop quips for 2 hours and 50 minutes. And okay, the guy's a stand-up comedian, but I think there's some dark and depressing stuff in this movie. I mean, we're talking about like this really brutal, like homophobic beating scene that happens at the beginning. We have like Jessica Chastain's husband literally punches her in the face. Like, these are disturbing things. And it just feels wrong to be like laughing throughout this movie. And that is what people in the audience were doing. And as much as I want to fault the people in our audience because the people next to us were incredibly obnoxious, I don't think that they were necessarily wrong. Like, personally, I thought the jokes sucked and they weren't really that funny. But there were jokes, right? And even in the, supposed to be the scariest parts, allegedly scariest parts at the end. And it ruined the tone of the movie for me down the stretch. I think that, we talk about how some of the scares weren't as effective, maybe because of the structure of the movie. I also think the tone played a huge role in that. And Bill Hader, he tries his best. He does a good job with what he's given, I think. But overall, I was satisfied with the character and found him irritating by the end, to be quite frank. I also thought that the relationship between him and Eddie, which was really underdeveloped, all of a sudden kind of springs up at the end of the movie. And I'm like, wait a minute, was there something I was missing here the whole time between the two of them? I don't want to say too much again, but I think y'all know what I'm getting at. But also, to jump off of what Danny said, I think Bill Skarsgård is the performer in the movie to me. I think that I agree with Danny that we needed more of the clown version of Pennywise. And I understand maybe why we didn't get much of that, because I think, Pennywise is a projection of all of their fears, and it's been 27 years since they've seen him, right? So in their minds, he has been built up to something, far more spectacular probably than they originally knew him as. So it makes sense that we see him in all of these really crazy, phantasmagoric forms when eventually he does appear. But I do love what Bill Skarsgård does with that Pennywise clown character, because he's an amalgamation of, again, all of the fears and all of the things that make that are haunting these characters. In some scenes, he's the sickly mother, like Eddie has, he's manipulating them emotionally. I'm thinking about the scene with the little girl in the baseball stadium. But in other scenes, he's Henry Bowers, right? He's the bully. He's calling Ben fat. He's picking on these guys just like Henry Bowers and his crew of Misfits did. And so I love like the droll tone that Bill Skarsgård brought to the performance. I think he was doing something really innovative for a horror villain. I think horror villains a lot of times are, when we think of the iconic ones, we think of the slashers, and they aren't really developed characters. I mean, like, they're people in masks. And we usually leave it to the other characters on screen to tell us about them and about their backstory. And I think that, in the end, when we look back at these two movies, I think one of the big takeaways will be what Bill Skarsgård brought to the role of Pennywise. Would have liked to see him bring more, but I still think what he did was really unique. And those are my takes on the cast, I guess. Scott, I'll let you jump in now.
Yeah, I think because Bill Skarsgård is the one person. I mean, of course, you have all the young actors in this as well, but I think Bill Skarsgård really is the standout because his performance is so fantastic and so consistent across both films. And so I think I'd agree with both of you. He really is a presence that I don't think this movie could live without. I think that he really embodies that role and plays it perfectly. I was reading some articles about kind of the method acting that he would undergo. Like, he would sit in his trailer for like an hour before getting himself, like, secluding himself and getting himself into role, which you can understand why he would need to do that. This role is crazy. It's psycho. It's absolutely out there. The place that you have to go to be able to reach that part of something inside of you to get that performance has to be something really special. And he was able to do it. And I think it was awesome. I do also wish that there was more of Pennywise, but I also think that I'm okay with the amount that we got because it didn't overstay its welcome. It never got old because Pennywise's stick is kind of the same always, right? And if you got too much of it, then it might overstay its welcome, like parts of this movie do in other places. So I'm content with wanting more and not getting more, I guess, in that sense. As for Bill Hader, I think this is going to be the one sticking point that we all have. I do think that the bad jokes are incredibly off-putting to start with. And then I do really agree that their choices to include some jokes towards the end of the movie and the climactic moments really spoiled some of the emotional resonance that those moments could have had. That being said, I do think upon a little bit more reflection earlier on in the film, I think that the bad jokes are the point. I think we talked about characters not growing. And I think I'm going to just go ahead and blame your theater. My theater was not laughing that much at Bill Hader's jokes. And I think that, in fact, the jokes are not meant to be funny. I think they're meant to be really off-putting because this character, Richie, is it Richie? Yeah. Richie is supposed to be in a place not unlike his younger version, although I think it's less noticeable in the first movie, I'd imagine. You guys maybe can comment more. You just saw the first movie again this past week, but this is a person who hasn't grown from 27 years ago, and he's dealing with things in a really unproductive way. If anything, he's grown more in a way where he's dealing with those emotions in that particular way and not dealing with them well, and trying to shove off things with jokes. And I think that his jokes are not funny. And I think as much as it was off-putting to me at first, over the course of the movie, as you see them get sprinkled in less, but then for some reason come back in those climactic moments, I think what you realize is that that's part of his growth, right? Part of his growth is not having these jokes and being able to process emotions and these difficult things that he's dealing with in ways that are more productive than the jokes that he was hurling as a stand-up comedian, whatever you want to say, towards the beginning of the film. Again, inexplicable that they brought them back, especially in those climactic moments, to spoil the tone a little bit. But I think Bill Hader absolutely does a wonderful job balancing that performance because, I don't know, maybe I just have a special place in my heart for Bill Hader. I think that he's absolutely amazing in most of the stuff that I've seen him in, but he's able to deliver those jokes in an off-putting way. Like, it sounds like the experience that you have listening to him do these jokes is exactly the experience that I expect that Muschietti would want you having. Again, maybe I'm putting words in his mouth here. Maybe they're supposed to be Letty. They're supposed to be a balance, but I don't think this movie is trying to balance anything with the number of jump scares that it has. I'd be really surprised if the movie was trying to be funnier than the first one. I think that would be a little bit strange to me. If that's the case, I'll put my hands up and say I shouldn't have given it the benefit of the doubt here. But again, I think that it's part of it. I do agree that the relationship with Eddie is underdeveloped, and you talk about the movie already being too long, and you don't understand their dynamic. And I thought, while at first I thought that was maybe because I just didn't remember the first movie well enough, it sounds like from what you guys are saying, and you guys saw it a few days ago, that relationship is, even from there, is not developed in the way that you'd like it to be. And so I definitely will defer to you guys on that one and say, if that's the case, then it's a little bit disappointing in that front, because I think that is meant to, I would argue that is meant to be a more powerful relationship than Bev's and Ben's, trajectory over the course of the film. And so that's disappointing on that note. And I know that this isn't necessarily the performance. I mean, you talked about, is it Jay Allen who's been?
Jay Ryan.
Jay Ryan. Jay Ryan. You know, I think that he does a really good job of the people. He was the one I didn't recognize in the adult cast. And so I think it was a good kind of debut performance for me. Obviously, he's been in other things before, but being the first thing that I saw him in. I do, however, not like the note that this character ends on or begins in, to be honest. So I guess it's not really a spoiler to say that, but you know, you talked about he's lost a lot of weight and he's this really ripped guy now. And I'll save my comments about this for the end with spoilers because it is a spoiler, I guess.
I think I know where you're going, and I
have a big problem with this character.
Interesting. Okay, I think I might agree with you if I know where you're going, but
you're probably on the same page. It's not hidden in the movie.
But okay, cool. If we have nothing else to say about the cast, why don't we just get right into that plot and into spoilers? I think that we've built things up enough. We're half hour in now, and so for those who haven't seen the film, pause it, skip ahead, check the time codes if you're listening on the podcast, and we will dispense with the spoilers soon. But let's get into it. Scott, I'll just go straight to you, so you can bring up what you were just looking at, and maybe we can have a discussion about that.
Yeah. So I think my problem is in concept, I agree with Danny that I like that Bev and Ben end up together. It's the right note more so than James McAvoy. However, the after image that this movie leaves on you is that you have to be skinny and ripped in order to get with the girl at the end. And that is a horrible, horrible message to leave people with. Yeah, to leave people with in 2019. So it goes against, sorry, just let me finish for 1 second.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it goes against a lot of the sensibilities I think that almost I would like to think that most viewers would have watching this movie. And I know that, again, I imagine this is straight from the source material, is how it ends up. But you know what? Take creative license and do something different with it. If you don't have the blessing of Stephen King, maybe that's another issue. But I think that it really sets a bad image that in order for this character to have his redemption moment to end up with Bev, that he has to have gone through this 27-year journey of becoming not the fat kid anymore. And so I just was really disappointed that was the note that's throughout the movie. That's not really a character development piece because that's what we get from the start of the film. But yeah, it was a real bummer to see that, even though I knew it was coming from a mile away.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, go ahead.
I will say though, as much as yes, because he is replaced, because the chubbier, younger Ben is replaced by an older, hotter, more fit Ben. I will say that that's the image that is given. However, Bev doesn't fall in love with him in the older movie.
This is what I was going to say, pretty much.
She fell in love with the guy who wrote her that note,
right?
Who made such an impact on her. And while I do agree that because of the casting and because of the image, yes, it does seem that way. But I think she was always in love with the boy who wrote her that note, and she just didn't know who it was. I mean, obviously they had all the memory loss things, and at some point she thought that it was Bill. But I do think that at the heart of it, the boy that she's in love with is the boy who always cared about her. And when they were doing the ritual, she saw that Ben still had the yearbook page that she had signed and everything like that. So I agree with you that I also was like, oh, kind of a bad look to say he had to be fit to get the hot girl. But because she is in love with more of how he treated her, I didn't mind it as much.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think that's totally fair. I just wish the movie had given us the ability to see that on screen rather than have to intuit that from her actions.
That's fair.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, Danny. Literally right out of my mouth. But this is why we're good co-coaches.
True.
I think that, Scott, what you're saying is a perfectly fair takeaway from the movie, and definitely as a base concept, yes, I agree that someone could look at this movie and think that it is sending that message. I think maybe if you look at it a little bit deeper, yes, like Danny said, that's not the reason that she does ultimately fall in love with him. But I imagine if we're talking real world here, it doesn't hurt that that's happened. Okay, something else I think we should talk about before we move into wrap up is the ending of the film, and specifically how the losers defeat Pennywise. Basically by willing him down to, basically nothingness, to sludge, making him believe that he is no longer the thing which they are afraid of. And that is how they're eventually able to kill him. What do you guys think about this ending? Does it tie up the themes of this two-part saga nicely, or is it a little, eye-rolly? Scott, we'll start with you.
Oh, I wasn't expecting to start first. I thought it was eye
Okay.
rolly. I'm sorry, guys, if you feel differently, but I was like, yeah, let's just shout, "He's a clown" to him, and that was something else. I tell you, it was. First off, the scene itself was super long, which didn't
Super long.
It never does itself any favors with that, especially when the final climax, after it felt like you've had like 2 or 3 climactic moments within this larger, sequence. That this is the climactic moment where you then have, I think it's Mike rip his heart, like take his heart out of his chest, and they all squeeze it together.
No, it's Eddie, right?
Oh, I thought it was Bill.
It's definitely not Eddie.
It's
Eddie's
definitely
dead.
not Eddie. I'm
Eddie's
sorry. Yeah,
dead.
I was thinking of something else. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe it was Bill.
It might
Maybe
have
it was Mike. Who
been
knows?
Mike.
It doesn't matter. Yeah.
The point is
What?
that it was unfortunately a really long scene and did not deliver on the promise of maybe the other climactic moments across both films, I think, right? Like the climactic moment in the first film, I think, is excellent. And unfortunately, this one doesn't get as good a service in its final actual climax. And that was disappointing to me. I think that there are moments within that larger sequence that are really touching, even if somewhat blunted by parts of the tone, parts of the fact that how long the scene was. But unfortunately, that big climax, that wasn't it. Danny, I don't know if you feel differently.
No, yeah, I definitely agree. Now, I read an article. I also have not read the book, the original source material, but I read an article that in the book, you actually are reading the end of the first movie and the end of the second movie at the same time, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah, that's how the structure of the novel is as a whole. It bounces back and forth. So
right.
It's different from that. It's not like split into kids and adults. Yeah.
Right. So from what I understand, I think that sort of did a disservice to the second movie because in the book, you're going to be reading that awesome first ending and kind of maybe the not as good second ending, but you're reading them at the same time. So I feel like it might have come off better. But yeah, I agree. They had like 4 pseudo endings before they had the real ending. And it's like, okay, I get it. Like, please stop faking me out. I also told Scott Harvey this, and I know that a huge part of Stephen King books and movies is the supernatural aspect. But for me, it felt like just so many supernatural aspects. Like, I didn't appreciate really the whole like Native American aspect of it. I just don't think that it was necessary. And I know it was in the book. And so the movie has to work with what the book works with. But I felt like there were so many other supernatural aspects that they didn't need that many. And I know that they made changes from the book. And so I don't know if maybe they considered that or if they considered trying to maybe make the ending a little bit different. Like, I thought it would have been perfect if I get that Eddie had to die, like for the, story, but I thought that when he shoved the thing in and he was like, it kills him if you believe it does, and I thought that would have been a good ending. I get it was probably like too good to be true and it's a horror film, so there can't be the super happy ending. But yeah, I completely agree with you, Scott Shelton, that there was just like a really long end scene, and then when they're like just you're a clown, like it just felt so like I almost started laughing because it was just really, really cheesy. I felt like when they were saying, oh, we have to make him get small so we can get him, if they had actually gone into the small part of the cave and then killed him, like that might have been a better ending. Again, I don't know exactly how the book ending works. I read like some of an article the other day, but I don't know. I just, long story short, I completely agree with you, Scott Shelton, that the ending left much to be desired.
Yeah. So I think that on paper, again, these things work. At least for me, they do. I like the idea of them having to get their tokens and, put them all in, destroy all their tokens. I think that works. But I think the part that doesn't work is, like you're saying, Danny, the whole ritual background and all of that, I feel like was just an unnecessarily messy way for us to get to, oh, we have to get these tokens. And not really rooted in reality, which I think a lot of the movie, although it does have, a lot of supernatural elements to Pennywise, I think the core of the movie is rooted in reality. And again, themes about small town America and violence and stuff like that. And so that did catch me off guard a little bit. It was a little bit off-putting. And then I don't even necessarily have a problem with the idea of them, willing Pennywise down to size and then killing him. I think it could be a really powerful moment where all of the characters come together and say, hey, this is it. Like, this is our last stand. We're not afraid of you anymore. Like, we've been through all of this together, and we're going to come together to finish off Pennywise once and for all. I think that's fine. But again, I think the execution of it is bad because of the tonal problems that we've already talked about, because we've had it's been really jokey leading up to this. I think that, yeah, it does feel kind of corny and cheesy and a little like, are we supposed to laugh here? And just like you said, the idea of them just screaming, you're a clown, you're a clown. Like, I think there's a more artful way that you can do that. And I think that it was too on the nose, too, hitting you over the head with a hammer to work. So I think, I really do. One of my takeaways is that I really do think Muschietti is a really good filmmaker based on these two movies. But some of the directorial choices, some of the choices in the script here, I think blunted the effect of what could have been some powerful scenes.
I think that's a really good point. I think it's almost undeniable that Muschietti has like a lot of craft. I think he just needed to be reined in a little bit more in this film. Again, he had a lot of material to work from with an 800, 900 page book, even across what ostensibly was like a 5 to 6 hour movie in total. But he has a lot of ideas. And I think you even saw this in his other movie as well, which I'm forgetting the name of. But he has a lot of ideas and a great directorial vision. He just needs someone to either a better editor or a better producer to kind of pare him down a little bit. I'm sure Stephen King was loving how much time his book was getting, so he probably wasn't someone who was going to pare him down too much. But I'm intrigued because his next movie is going to be The Flash. If someone at DC is going to rein him in, because they've let their directors get the better of themselves in their extended universe, and especially in a couple of movies so far. So I like Muschietti. I like what he's doing. This is not a perfect movie by any stretch of the imagination. He probably did better in it, Chapter 1. And I think The Flash could be a good evolution for him as someone with, a little bit tighter source material, or maybe in some ways, maybe even a little bit more creativity involved with it. And especially and a lot more effects too, as well. I think that he does a good job here, but he probably could have been helped out a little bit more by, his editors and his production company.
I agree.
Yeah. Well, guys, on Pet Sematary, we had a little bit of a spirited debate, I think, but this time it seems like we're all kind of on the same page, which I have to say, it feels nice.
Except for Bill Hader.
Feels like we're our own little losers club here. So shout out to us.
Yeah, I've been that way for 24 years. Let's go.
Yeah, same. Let's be real. Okay, guys, with that, I think we can move up into our wrap-up phase now. I'll go to Scott first because, Danny, you may not know this is coming since it's something we do on every episode. But favorite scene or moment, I'll give you some time to think of yours, Danny. Scott, do you got one?
Yeah, I think I do have one. It's fitting because I said that I really liked Bill Skarsgård and I really liked Ben Hader, so I'm going to pick a moment that they have, and it is Bill Hader's token scene. I think that scene with Paul Bunyan, the Paul Bunyan statue, is really cool. I think that not just in the fact that he has a giant Paul Bunyan statue chasing him and trying to stab him with a pitchfork or whatever the heck he was holding. I can't remember what it is right now, but I also think that the effect, and even though it was in the trailer, I believe, and even in the first movie too, probably, but the effect or the visual moment of Pennywise, like, I don't know, like leaping, jumping down from his little perch with the balloons and floating down to the ground to meet kind of Bill Hader face to face. I think that is, I don't know, there's something I just found really captivating about that visual. And I know that's a minor moment in the film overall, but I think that really speaks to that craft that Muschietti has and that vision that Muschietti has that I was just talking about. And that is a moment where you get kind of, those two actors that I really thought crushed it in this movie, particularly. And then that vision of a type of horror that I think everyone wants more of, right? Like, as much as there are a lot of jump scares in this film, I think there are moments where this movie does fit into that newer category of horror or newer spin of horror that I think that really captivates me more. Your Midsommars, your Quiet Places, your Get Outs, your Us's. I think that there are flickers of that even in it, both Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. even though it's a classic horror novel from Stephen King, and I really appreciate that from Muschietti.
All right, Dani, favorite scene or moment?
I actually did remember this from last time, so I thought about it before coming on.
Oh, sorry. I should have given you more credit.
No, I've gone first for most of our discussion points here, so I'm glad you had Scott Shellen go first. But my favorite scene was actually when they were at the Chinese restaurant at the beginning, because
we're so on the same wavelength here.
Yeah, so like, okay, I get it's a horror film, and I'm supposed to be loving the horror parts and stuff, and there were great parts that made me very scared, but I love seeing the whole cast interact. Like you said, Scott Harvey, part of what was not as great about the middle of the film was that all the great actors and actresses that we liked seeing interact, or actress, I should say, they didn't have a lot of ladies, but Jessica Chastain is just such an entity, such a performance that she seems like more than one woman, but
she's enough lady to go around in this movie.
She definitely is, but I just loved that scene. I loved watching them interact. And then I did like the scary tone that it took when, we all know already what has happened to Stanley, but they don't. And they're opening the fortune cookies and they're seeing what had happened. And like, I just thought that was like this kind of perfect blend. And at that point, I liked Bill Hader's jokes. And I thought the humor was appropriate because they were kind of bringing back in, letting us re-see who this older character is. And I just really, really liked the visuals of that scene. And then like, as the horror started becoming crazier and crazier, and I knew at some point that the staff of the restaurant was going to come out and be like, what the heck are you crazy psychos doing? And it was perfect to me. I thought that scene was just like perfectly executed. I really liked it. And I also love that aspect, like I said, of we as the audience already know what has happened to Stanley, but I kind of liked having that like look behind the curtain as the characters discovered it as well. So that was my favorite scene of the movie.
Yeah, I really like that scene a lot too. And I do like the horror elements of it as well, because I think something we have flirted with but not really talked about is that this movie for a blockbuster is weird. And I like that. I like that this movie is not afraid to do some really weird things in the horror sequences. And I think this is a great example with these like fortune cookies and like these deformed bugs coming out of them and flying all over the place. That was creative and weird, and I like that for what is a blockbuster horror movie. So I like that. But for the sake of being different, I will say I did like the last 5 minutes or so. We have Mike reading a letter. We see him drive through Derry, and I think one particular moment that stands out to me when he looks in the store window and we see the reflection of the kids in the store window. That was great. I thought that was a really nice nostalgic moment to tie me back to, again, the first movie, which I liked more. Maybe that's why I really liked the shot. But, at that point, we have spent a solid 5.5 hours with these characters. And it feels right to go back to the beginning there at the end and see how far that they've come over the course of that 5.5, 6 hours or so. And so I really enjoyed that moment. And I think that the movie ends in general on a nice nostalgic note. So I appreciated that. Mm-hmm. All right, guys, let's put a score on it out of 10. Dani, we'll start with you. Give this a score out of 10. You can use decimals, 100-point scale.
I think I would give it an 8.7.
Whoa.
Yeah, I know that it's high. I know that I was very critical of a lot of aspects of it. But generally speaking, I just loved the first one so much that while there were aspects of the second one that I did not like, I felt like it carried on enough of the sentiment of the first one. And there were some really still great performances like we talked about. So I think that I probably am going to say that in a few days, I'll think that it's a little lower than an 8.7, but right now I feel good about that number. Plus, I think I gave Pet Sematary like a high 7, low 8, and I did like this more than that. So I'm trying to be consistent in my own scoring here. So for right now, I'm an 8.7.
I think you are actually the lowest score on Pet Sematary, if I remember correctly. So,
I was, but it was still, I think, high 7, low 8, and I
don't think so.
I did not give that movie.
I was going to say Scott was in the
low
6s
8
on that, I think.
No, I did not give that a high 7.
I think this is where I'm standing.
You're fine. No, stick to your guns. You feel it's an 8.7, it's an 8.7. That's totally fine.
Definitely
I'm a little bit surprised. I'm a little bit surprised based on what you were saying in the review, but that's awesome.
Definitely has something in common with our other favorite guest, Jay. That's for sure. When it comes to scoring the movies,
yeah, he hit home runs on every movie.
Well, I don't have as many to compare it to. So
Attack of the Clones, 7.1. All right, Scott.
Unreal.
What's your score?
I'm giving it a 7.2. I like this movie. The more that I get away from it, I wonder if I'd go even higher with more removed. But it's a long movie to experience, and so I can't give it too high of a score because of that. It's hard to get through those things. There are tonal issues, but the good thing, I think this is a good thing about the movie, and I'm starting to understand why I got a B+ cinema score, is that I think that there are really positive notes and really strong performances that stick with you that might even overcome some of the more negative things. Scott, I know that you might feel differently. It sounds like some of those negative things spoiled some parts of the movie more for you than for others, but I'm going with a 7.2, and I really like this movie a lot.
Yeah, I definitely understand why it's playing with audiences. I mean, to your point, my roommate went to see it today. He has been reading the book. He was really excited to see it. I told him, he asked me what I thought, and I was like, I kind of agree with what the reviews are saying. But he actually came back and he thought it was incredible. So he really enjoyed the movie. So I mean, I see why audiences are enjoying it. I think if you enjoyed the first film, I can't see you not enjoying at least parts of the second film. But I am going to be the grouch this time around. I think maybe the problems just resonated a little bit more with me than with you guys. So I'm going with a 6.7. So not too much lower, but 6.7. It's a solid movie. If you like the first, you should definitely see it.
Yeah, I thought you were going to go lower than that. So it makes my heart a little bit warmer that you stayed higher than I thought you would.
Wait, but I'm confused, Scott. You told me that in your grand ranking, it's above Pet Sematary, and I thought you gave Pet Sematary a higher score.
I think you're making up what we gave Pet Sematary. I'll have to go back and check.
I'll check it after this.
Okay, I actually do think Danny is right about that.
Okay, I've got the scores right here. So
I think this is one of those things where I think that Pet Sematary is a better film, but I enjoy it Chapter 2 like a little bit more, maybe.
Okay,
yeah, so I gave it a 7.
That's higher on my list.
I gave it a 7, Pet Sematary, that is, and Scott gave it a 7.7. So you're right about that one. I think that this is a movie that, to Scott's point, I'm going to like more than it necessarily is good. And I think that's because it has a lot of goodwill from the first movie. And some of the things that stick with me more from films, I would say, on average, this thing gets right. This movie gets right, and some of the other stuff that doesn't get right.
Fair enough.
I agree. All right, guys. Well, that should just about do it for our discussion of It Chapter 2. When we come back after the break, we got a little bit of news and trailer talk before we close out. So stick with us. We'll be right back. And we'll just come right back. That was just for the podcast. So
yeah, just take a pause.
Okay.
Should I stop?
Oh, I don't have the news that we want. Oh, it's in the Discord, right?
I'm guessing I don't have anything to add to the news.
Danny, you can feel free to hang out. We can also, we can take you off the screen if you think it's going to be awkward, but it's up to
There's
you.
some trailers like that we watched if you want to talk about those. Like you've seen some of them, I think.
Oh, okay. Then I'll stay.
Well, Ashley, you should tell her what trailers we're talking about.
Well, you saw the Black Christmas trailer. I don't know if you want to comment on that, but okay. We'll just have you stay in. Just
cool. Sounds good to me.
Chip in
All right.
if you have anything to add. Okay.
Just take a pause and then start again so it's easy to edit.
Welcome back to this episode of Some Like It, Scott. Scott and Danny, before we close out today's episode, just a few news items and trailer talk to get to. Let's talk about what went down at D23. A lot of big news at the Disney conference. Star Wars, Marvel, the like. Particularly in the Star Wars area, we got some big announcements. The Obi-Wan series is now confirmed with Ewan McGregor starring. This series will be set sometime after Revenge of the Sith. Obviously, there's a lot of time that passes between Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. We see Obi-Wan as an old man in A New Hope. So I'm excited to learn about what happens with Obi-Wan in this time period because, at the end of Revenge of the Sith, there is that hint of Yoda talking to Obi-Wan about how, I can get in touch with Qui-Gon. So maybe we're going to see Qui-Gon. I don't know that we're going to see Liam Neeson return necessarily, but maybe we will get some version of Qui-Gon, and that interests me because I do love that character. So that excites me, Scott. Also in the Star Wars area, Mandalorian trailer dropped, and the internet really blew up over this thing, and it's easy to see why. This trailer is awesome. It looks like it's going to be a pretty dark tone for a Star Wars show, which I'm excited about. It's going to be dropping as soon as Disney Plus launches in November. So we got that, and then finally in the Star Wars realm, new Rise of Skywalker trailer, Scott. This is probably the thing that everyone was talking about, particularly because of a particular image in the trailer where we see Rey with a double-bladed red lightsaber the Dark Ray theories have been going off on Twitter. I don't think we want to dive too deeply into our conspiracy theories on that, Scott. You can if you want to. But what are your takeaways from all of the Star Wars news that we got out of D23?
Yeah, the Star Wars news is good stuff, right? Ewan McGregor coming back. We are, of the listeners who will tune into the Star Wars series that we do starting next month in October, will learn that we really like Ewan McGregor in the prequel trilogy. And so to see that he's coming back to get his own 6 or 8 episode miniseries, whatever it ends up being over at Disney Plus, it's awesome, right? That's almost as much airtime, if not more, if you actually just count his time on screen, than you probably get in the prequel trilogy, which is awesome and insane to think about. Whether or not we see Qui-Gon Jinn return in that illusion that you're talking about from Revenge of the Sith, I don't know. But you know what? Disney has a lot of money to throw at these things. And if they want Liam Neeson to come back and play Qui-Gon Jinn, Liam Neeson will get enough money to come back and play Qui-Gon Jinn. So, right. Yeah, we'll see if that happens. We have no idea what direction that story is going to go. But all we know is that Ewan McGregor is going to get his Obi-Wan series. And I couldn't be more excited about that for sure. When it comes to The Mandalorian, I'm totally on board. One of the things that I really like that you didn't necessarily mention, that we learned, whether it was at D23 or around D23, that Disney Plus is not going to be taking the Netflix approach to, mass dropping content onto their platform. They're going to be taking the HBO approach and the broadcast television approach of doing 1 episode per week, which I think is great. I think it's awesome. What Netflix is doing is clearly resonates with a lot of people in who are watching their content, But for me, these, my biggest fear was that Game of Thrones, for example, might be the last big event show that we ever get on television. That, every single week you don't get this build up. We got that a little bit with Big Little Lies after Game of Thrones, but it's so good to see that on Disney Plus. We're going to get that
season 2.
What'd you say?
I was just hyping. I want Euphoria season 2 to be the next one, but
yeah, sure. Fair enough, right? As well. But it's so exciting to see that something like The Mandalorian and these other Disney Plus Marvel series are going to be getting episodic releases every single week to get more of that shared experience of watching those, whether it's, every Sunday night at 9 or whatever day that it is, right? Getting to see that together as a group of people and get hyped and see Twitter just explode over it all at one time. I think that that's awesome. And that's maybe even the best news, as much as that trailer was awesome in and of itself. Like, I thought that Mandalorian trailer was great, and I'm just more excited about that. And then finally, Dark Ray. We don't have to dive too much deeper. It's probably could be its own podcast on its own, but I am buying some of the theories around Dark Ray, or maybe just Ray in general, because there's different takes on one particular theory about Ray being a clone, or at least Dark Ray being a clone, that I very much subscribe to. I buy into it. We've seen it in adjacent Star Wars media and novels. We've seen this idea of clones and related to the Emperor Palpatine before, so I'm not going to all be surprised if that's the direction it goes. Because it was shown in a trailer, it's not going to be something that's the biggest spoiler of all time. JJ's not going to throw something in the trailer that is going to spoil Act 3 of the movie. That would be insane. That would be absolutely insane if that happened. And I really trust that he wouldn't let that happen. I know that he doesn't ultimately have probably control over what goes into a trailer, but I think he probably has enough control, and people over at Lucasfilms have enough control still to be able to prevent something like that from happening, because we see that a lot in movies, but I think that they're smarter than that. So that's my thoughts on the Star Wars stuff.
Yeah, Scott, I think that, obviously I love Star Wars, and so do you, but I'm not one of these fans who's like, no Dark Ray, like I'm opposed to this will destroy everything that they've set up. I think if you make a good movie, if you make me believe it, then I'm here for it. I just want a good movie. Like Last Jedi for me, like I know people had issues with it because of, they didn't like how Luke was portrayed, and there are obviously a lot of other issues. But I just want to see a good movie, and The Last Jedi was a great movie. So I really did enjoy it. I'm not one of these super purists when it comes to Star Wars, and so I'm excited to see. I agree with you that I don't think we are going to see a Dark Ray, but I'm excited to see what JJ has in store. Like, I really just can't wait to see this film. Scott, I'll throw it to you for this, though, since you are our resident Marvel expert. What are any of your standouts from the Marvel news that we got at D23?
Yeah, I think we were a little bit more limited on the Marvel news, to be honest. The things that I'd rather talk about is actually on the Disney side, or maybe more specifically the Pixar side. But for the Marvel points, to your point, getting the release date for Black Panther 2 in 2022 was awesome. We knew it was coming already. It was teased. at San Diego Comic-Con, but knowing that it's going to be that first movie in Phase 5 or that first movie that we get in 2022, at least it seems that way, is really exciting. Ryan Coogler coming back. I love Ryan Coogler. I wish that we could have Michael B. Jordan back in that, but still, Black Panther was one of my favorite movies from 2018, so couldn't be more excited about that coming out in 2022, even though it is, 2.5 years away, 2 years and 8 months away, whatever it is. Still good to see that. Also, knowing that we're going to get even more Disney Plus series. We're getting like Moon Knight, She-Hulk. There's one other one that I'm forgetting right now. Miss Marvel.
Miss Marvel, yeah.
Yeah, Miss Marvel. So those are all really exciting things. And I think those are technically going to be part of Phase 4. So we're getting a little bit of a light rollout at the beginning in the first year, but it's really going to ramp up in that second and third year. And that's exciting just from a content perspective for Disney Plus. Now, for me, the two things that I really do want to mention here on the Disney and Pixar side of things is that the first look at Cruella, specifically the image of Emma Stone as Cruella de Vil, I think that's awesome. Did not even know about that project really. I knew it existed, but I didn't realize that it was something that they would be showing at a place like D23. And I think that Emma Stone as Cruella is something different than we've seen from Emma Stone and really exciting. And then the other part, Scott, I know you're maybe less of a Pixar fan than I am. I don't know. Maybe we can duke that out on another episode. But Pete Docter's next movie, we got a little bit called Soul, which is coming out in summer next year. We got a little bit more details about it. Obviously his last movie, Inside Out, was one of my favorite movies of the decade. And it was in my top 20 when we talked about it last week. And so getting his next movie, Soul, with Jamie Foxx and Tina Fey being the two leads in that movie, got me more excited just to even see the concept art, right? We're not getting too much yet. But those are the two things that are outside of the Star Wars and Marvel universe that got me really excited at D23. And things that I weren't expecting to see.
Yeah. I like Pixar. I have my favorites and least favorites, as anyone does, I think. So I'm definitely a little bit more excited about Soul than I am about Onward, which is the other movie we're going to get early next year. I haven't loved what I've seen from that so far. But Danny, I'll ask you, since I know you're a Marvel fan as well. We need to see Endgame together, of course. What are you looking forward to in the next phase of Marvel MCU movies or TV shows?
Oh, that's tough. There's so many things. I really, really like, I know you guys talked about this a couple episodes back, but I love Scarlet Witch in the Marvel movies. So I'm really excited for her series on Disney Plus. I think that's going to be awesome. I liked Vision too. So however much he's going to be involved, if he is, I'm excited about. I'm excited to see her in Doctor Strange. Pretty much just like a big, big fan of her character. I think her powers are so cool. And so I'm excited to see more of an exploration of that.
That Doctor Strange movie is going to be a horror movie. So we're going to have you on for that one, obviously. So
I'm more than happy to join. Yeah. So I'm very excited too about Black Panther 2. Totally agree with Scott that it's a travesty that Michael B. Jordan can't come back, but I'm sure that we probably have like different motivations for that. I'm
not sure that our motivations are different on that.
I think they are.
What'd you say?
I'm saying I think they are.
The last movie that I'm very, very excited about. Oh, I love Scarlett Johansson. Super excited about Black Widow, especially because there are so many question marks right now about like, is it a prequel? Is it she's still alive on Dormir? Like all that crazy stuff. So I'm super, super excited about that one as far as like plot wise. But I think I'm most excited to watch Elizabeth Olsen reprise Scarlet Witch. So that's my coverage of the Marvel stuff for now.
I'm with you on WandaVision, especially now that it sounds like it's going to be a sitcom, which is kind of weird, or have a sitcom vibe to it. But we'll see how that goes.
That makes me less excited, just to put my 2 cents.
Yeah,
in, whatever.
That makes me less excited too. But hopefully they really put a new spin on the sitcom genre.
Yeah, no, I'm interested to see something different. So we'll see. Okay, that's the D23 news. Scott, let's talk a little bit of a couple trailers before we go. We'll start with a couple that just you and I have seen, and then we'll finish with one that we've all three seen. So let's start with Waves, which is another A24 movie. It's a little bit worse than A24 movie that we're going to be getting later this year. Trey Edward Schultz. This is his third film. He's done all of them with A24, Krisha, and It Comes at Night, his first two, of course. And this is a sort of coming-of-age family drama. Gives me a little bit of a Barry Jenkins feel in the trailer, I will say. But starring Sterling K. Brown, Kelvin Harrison Jr., who we just saw in Loose, Scott. And we haven't talked about that movie, but he was phenomenal in that film. One of the best performances of the year for me. And also, who am I forgetting? Alexa Demie from Euphoria is also going to be in this movie. Scott, I did not know a thing about this movie. I haven't seen Trey Edward Schultz's other movies. I know I need to watch It Comes at Night. I think I'd really like it. But after this trailer, this movie looks fantastic.
Yeah, it does. It's definitely one that I'm really looking forward to. I love Sterling K. Brown. I wish we'd seen more of him in Black Panther, just to touch on that note, going back to Black Panther from a second ago. But Kelvin Harrison Jr., amazing in Loose. That movie wasn't a perfect movie. I was so hyped for it that I had such a high bar for it, which is my own fault, but I still loved it nevertheless. I'm still thinking about that movie, even though I saw it like 3 or 4 weeks ago at this point. And yeah, I'm very excited about this film. It was not on my radar at all. And to know that it's coming out in the next couple months is extremely exciting. The trailer doesn't show you too much other than, what the feel of the movie is. The color palette looks really interesting for the type of film that it is. The kind of almost Florida Project-like color palette of it, Scott. I don't know. At least that's the vibe that I got.
Maybe that was what was kind of giving me very Jenkins vibes a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Well. Right, exactly to your point, because If Beale Street Could Talk was such a colorful and bright movie.
And Moonlight, I know you haven't seen it, but yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one, so it's hard for me to speak to that. But yeah, I'm really excited about this film, and what a surprise A24 has it, and it looks interesting.
Yeah, nothing but bangers over there. Okay, Scott.
NBB, nothing but bangers.
NBB, that's right. Maybe they should just change the name of the studio to that. Scott, we'll continue the enthusiastic praise now with our next trailer. Another movie that I am so looking forward to, and a trailer that is getting me so hyped, and that is the trailer for Jojo Rabbit, the new film from Taika Waititi. Scott, this is the second trailer, of course. The first trailer, we liked the look of it, but didn't show too much. This trailer, we got definitely more of a feel for the movie. We got a better look at Sam Rockwell, Scarlett Johansson, of course, Taika Waititi himself playing Hitler. We also got our first look at Thomas
imaginary friend Hitler, to be clear. Imaginary friend Hitler, not real Hitler.
We got our first look at Thomasin McKenzie, who is playing a Jewish girl that our main character, I don't know the actor's name, but he encounters. And that seems to be what is driving some of the plot of the movie. And that's not really something that we knew about beforehand. But Scott, I think that this movie looks so good. The tone of the movie is going to be really interesting. Definitely a little bit of Inglourious Basterds vibes, which I mean, it's not going to be a Tarantino-like movie, but the tone with which it is taking on World War II, I think, is somewhat similar to the tone that Tarantino took on in Inglourious Basterds. So that gets me excited. I just think this looks like a really original and possibly like really powerful movie. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, Roman Griffin Davis is the main character. Yeah. And yeah, this film looks great. I mean, we talked for like 15 minutes about how much we'd hate Disney if they did something stupid with this film. But yeah, coming from Fox Searchlight, they're always good for whatever they're putting out, really. I mean, they had Ready or Not just a couple weeks ago, which we both saw, but we haven't talked about, that we both loved. This obviously very different, taking a historical aspect. But, you talk about getting vibes of Barry Jenkins in the last film. This film gives me vibes of Wes Anderson, and sure, in all the right ways, right? It checks all the boxes for me. I think that I really liked this trailer for exactly what you were talking about, giving us a better sense of what we're going to be experiencing in the film, what the point of the film was, what's the background of it. We still don't know exactly where the film is going, and that's a good thing, and I wouldn't expect them to reveal that. But to know that Thomasin McKenzie, or getting to see Thomasin McKenzie's character, and not just Roman Griffin Davis and Taika Waititi, which is the majority of kind of the teaser. I don't even think it was a full length trailer that we got. But to get that additional color, that additional context for the film, to also see what the setup is, Scarlett Johansson, Sam Rockwell, this kid who is trying to be a Nazi but is conflicted. It's really interesting. Obviously going to be huge satire, and it's exactly the kind of movie that we need. To our point from the last time we had this kind of news segment on the podcast, that we're getting deprived of right now because of particular circumstances, and I'm all on board for this.
Yeah, I think when people first saw this trailer, they were like, "What is this movie?" With this like goofy, silly-looking Hitler character.
Yeah, something's up with your mic, Scott. Can you just want to plug it and plug it back in?
How about now?
Beautiful.
Yeah, Scott, I think when people saw this first trailer, they were kind of confused, like, what is this movie with this silly, goofy-looking Hitler character? But I think that this trailer definitely gave us a better vibe. Like you said, it's going to be a satire. There's this whole part, introducing the Thomason McKenzie character. There's this whole line that one of the main character's friends says to him about, like, how would you know if you saw a Jew? What if they look just like you? I think that's probably going to be a major idea in the movie. And so, yeah, I couldn't be more excited for this movie. All right, let's move to the final trailer, one that we all saw. This played before It Chapter 2, at least for me and Danny, it did. This is another Blumhouse production. Talking of another studio that we could qualify as NBB, probably. Nothing but bangers. That would be Blumhouse, because they've really been crushing it recently. And this Black Christmas is, of course, a remake of a 1974 movie, I believe. There have actually been a lot of remakes.
I was going to say, yeah, there's been a more recent remake than this.
2006, I think, was maybe the most recent one, but there's been several remakes. However, from what I know of the original, it looks like this movie is going to be taking on a bit of a different vibe than the original, which I think takes place. I could be completely wrong about this, and if so, edit it out, please. But
no way.
I think the original takes place like all in one night in this sorority house, but here it looks like we're spanning several days. Maybe there's like more of an indictment of like the school that like the school certainly seems to play more of a role in this movie than maybe in the original Black Christmas. But this is going to be directed by Sophia Takal, who made this movie called Always Shine, which is a really good movie. I'm not sure that either of y'all have seen it, but you should check it out. And starring Imogen Poots, someone who I'm a big fan of from one of the best shows ever that got canceled way too soon, Roadies, and some other movies like Green Room. But this looks like a really fun slasher. We don't get a lot of horror movies at Christmas, and so I think this could be a really cool addition to the holiday movie season. Danny, do you agree?
Yes. First of all, there's Nothing But Bangers acronym has me crying for no reason.
Yeah, there's going to be a really weird sound, and when Scott was saying that I will not be able to edit out.
I'm sorry, I snort when I laugh, guys. Please ignore it. But okay, first of all, I love slasher films. I've always loved slasher films. To me, those used to be the only ones that would scare me, because ghost films, like, it's not real, and I at least I don't believe in ghosts, and more supernatural stuff, it just never scared me because I knew it couldn't happen. But a slasher can happen. Somebody can go crazy and come and stab people. And I love that aspect of it. I also love the kind of like cliche aspects that come with, the college-based slasher films. I love the kind of, I'm sure it might have not as many of the kind of like comedy horror as like the Scream franchise, for example. I know I brought that up last time I was on here, but it's one of my favorites. But I don't think the trailer did not make it seem like there would be those comedy aspects, but I feel like just by it being in the sorority house based around Greek life, there's probably going to be at least some of that aspect, or at least I'm hoping for some of that aspect. So I was really excited about the trailer. Scott and I were like whispering in the theater. Scott Harvey and I were whispering about how we were excited about that film, so as to not disturb other viewers, unlike our fellow viewers in the film. But yeah, I'm very, very excited about it. I didn't really recognize any of the characters, like the main actors, which is typical with a horror film. And so I'm kind of excited to maybe see how these breakout performances, or what will hopefully be breakout performances, blossom into the film.
Yeah, one of the things that I love about what Blumhouse is doing is that you will sometimes get known actors in minor roles or supporting roles, but they're almost always giving new actors and up and coming actors and actresses the slots at the center point of the film that, maybe other studios wouldn't take the same risks on. I don't know, but it's also how they keep their budget down, probably. But it works, and these actors and actresses usually crush it in those roles. And so, yeah, I echo what you said, Danny. I think this trailer looks really interesting. Slasher is a genre that I do like in the horror genre. I'm not a huge fan of the supernatural horror, which is ironic since we just talked about a supernatural horror film to some extent. But the slasher film is one that I can always get on board for. I enjoyed Halloween, the remake. Well, I shouldn't say remake, but retcon sequel of Halloween from last year.
What it's considered, yeah.
Yeah, but I enjoyed that, and I'm on board for this. I think Halloween probably had some input from. Did that have a Blumhouse influence as well? I can't remember.
Yeah, it was produced by Blumhouse. Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. So yeah, I'm very excited about this as well, and couldn't just ready for it. It's also nice. I was listening to Movie Talk, a Collider show the other day, and they were talking about how it's nice that a Christmas movie is actually going to be released in December rather than November. So that's another cool thing. This is releasing, I think, the week before episode 9, so a couple weeks.
You don't
before
think
Christmas.
Cats is going to be a Christmas movie?
Yeah, I'll take a soft pass on talking about Cats.
All right, fair enough. Okay. And I should say, for context, since we've referenced it a couple times, the people next to us, the most obnoxious thing that they did during the movie was that during one of the scary scenes where Pennywise is counting down 1, 2, 3, when he got to 2, this person yells out loudly in a crowded theater, "Boo!" And it was so annoying.
Is that better or worse than like chicken wings with like honey mustard sauce or something?
Yeah, that was at A Quiet Place. That's pretty bad too. But
well, I also had that before Captain Marvel. Didn't I think I talked about that?
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
But nothing tops when Scott Harvey and I saw Avengers Endgame, and there was a crying baby the whole time. I'm sorry, I will never forgive that mother for bringing the baby to that.
And this was the thing. This was the thing about the crying baby too. They kept having issues. They took it out a couple of times, and then finally they took it out. They were gone. We're like, okay, we'll never see them. An hour and a half later, they come back in. Like an hour and a half later, like the battle is happening at the end. Like they would have to have had no idea what was going on in the film. And so, yeah. But anyway, rant over.
What a weird experience.
It was strange. Now that I'm off my soapbox, I think we can finish out this episode as like it, Scott. I want to.
Don't worry, all our listeners are gone already.
I was about to say, no, you'll never hear any of this anyway because Scott's going to edit it out. But thank you. That should do it for this week's episode. Scott, or we'll go to Dani first. Dani, where can our listeners find you on Twitter?
My Twitter is very inactive. I prefer Instagram followers. It's a DKunk, so that's a D as in Danny, K as in koala, UNKK. That's my Instagram.
We got there eventually, people.
I'm on Facebook too if you want to follow me there, but Instagram is my most active form of social media.
Don't friend her, just follow her on Facebook.
I'll follow back. At this rate, you're never going to hear from me on the podcast again, so got to make a strong plug for some followers.
We need someone to laugh at our jokes, honestly. Otherwise, it's just like an empty echo chamber. But Scott, where can our listeners find you on Twitter?
At @SShelton2013.
And I'm at Scarby Dent. We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Some Like It, Scott. If you have and you'd like to support our show, don't forget about our Patreon page, patreon.com/MediaPlugPods. But if you choose not to support our Patreon, that's okay too. We would still love if you rated and reviewed us on iTunes so that we can continue to grow our listener base. And we hope you'll be back for our next episode in which we will be reviewing the Donna Tartt adaptation, The Goldfinch. For now, I'm Scott Harvey. For Scott Shelton and Dani Kunkel, we will see you next time.